I am the youngest of Presentacion and Esther Vasquez. There was 12 of us, or actually 13. My mother gave birth to 13, but there was 12 surviving, and I was the youngest child. And I was actually born in San Antonio. I believe I'm the only one that was born in San Antonio, and all my other siblings were born in McAllen. I do recall, we have great memories. I actually was living in San Antonio for my first 8-9 years of my life. I do remember that I had polio when I was about 4 years old on one of my legs, and I remember being in the hospital and seeing my brother Beto and Orpha. Those are the two that I kind of remember, and Pete. I looking out the window from my hospital room and seeing them, and they would be saying hello to me and that kind of stuff. I remember that they would put me in some ice baths when I was in the hospital, and I remember coming home and having a brace on my leg where I had shoes that were nailed to one piece of like a wooden block, and I guess to make my other legs stronger and be able to stand up. But it was a blessing because I was healed from the polio. So I've been okay. Maybe it was just a year of my life then. I do remember playing a lot with my brothers and sisters. I remember being picked on, but they said it was because I was spoiled. So they used to hide from me. I remember my brother Pete and Bob would do these rubber band, things and shoot Orpha and me with them. I remember that we had like a basement in that house that we lived at, and the house was a 2-bedroom home, and there must have been at least 10 of us living there at the time. And I remember I slept with my mom and dad, and I think in the other bed was Beto and Orpha and Pete and maybe Becky. So there was 2 beds in that one room, and then in the other room the rest of my sisters, a couple of my brothers lived or slept in the living room. They were I remember they were in the service, and when Caleb would come home or Ephraim would come home, then they would sleep in the living room. I remember we had kind of like a basement underneath the house, and that's where my brothers would go under there and do things that they weren't supposed to do, like smoking or doing things like that. I remember my brother Bob. There was a movie, it was a drive-in theater near our house, and he would climb the back of the screen. He would climb way up there in the back of the screens to get pigeons and pigeon eggs. And he must have been, I don't know, see, we moved when I was 9, so 11, so he must have been 7, 8 years old, climbing that huge screen. I also remember as kids, so it was probably maybe Pete, Orpha. I do remember Orpha and Beto and me. We would actually take a bus. I don't know how we did that, but we were kids. But we would take a bus ride, go downtown, and go and stay in the department store where my sister Josie used to work, and we would play house there, where they had the sofas and living room furniture and that kind of stuff, and we would just kind of play house there. So that was kind of strange, but that's what we did. Being the youngest, my sisters were married. My sister Terry was already married. Anicha was married. Josie was married. And I do remember on weekends, I think my mom was kind of tired, so I would go and spend the weekends, especially with my sister Josie. And she would say that she was hiring me to clean her house, and of course I was like 6 years old. But I do remember dusting her living room for her and spending the weekend with her, and she would always take me to the library, which I loved. So she would take me to the library, and I would spend the weekend with her. I also did the same with Terry, and Terry had Ricky and Cindy. Cindy is maybe 4 or 5 years younger than I was, so I remember being able to take care of her, or what I thought was taking care of her, So very good memories. I also remember my brother Sammy living he was married, and he lived next door to us with Nettie. And I remember that when I think it was maybe Dennis was born, again going over there and thinking that we were going to be taking care of these infant, and we were like 5 or 6 years old at the time. We always played outside in the evenings. We used to have fireflies I think they were fireflies, the ones that had the little light, the bugs, fire bugs or something, and we would pull the little bugs out, the little light out, and put them as jewelry in our hands. We played out in the streets with all the neighborhood kids. I remember for elementary school, there really wasn't an elementary school by our house, so they converted this high school into elementary school where I went. So they didn't have any playground equipment or anything. So I remember having to make do with what was there, and we would make dolls out of, out of our sweaters. We would fold them up and make them into a doll, and that's how we would play during recess. I remember walking home, and frequently there would be older boys fighting in the middle of the street with usually they would fight like with belts. They would take their belts off, and they would be just fighting like crazy. I remember one time, I think it was somebody was after Orpha, and scary stuff like that, and we'd have to run home all the way home. When I was, I believe it was 9 years old, 8.5, 9 years old, my dad had left to California to work. And I do remember also for Christmas, my dad used to leave a lot to go to work in Chicago during the wintertime. And when he would come home, he would always have all these gifts for us. And then my brother Caleb, he used to always buy us the most beautiful, expensive gifts. I remember having a doll that was in a suitcase, and it came with all kinds of clothes, and I remember, I think Orpha got a little oven set where she could bake all these things, and I remember, I think Pete ended up taking that, going into a closet and baking everything and eating it, It was just like, but I do remember Christmas was very special because we would get such nice gifts. I also remember a lot of people coming over to eat. My mother would be making stacks of tortillas like this, and I remember Sammy coming over, and kind of Nettie saying, where's, be looking for Sammy. Instead of going home to his home, he would come to my mom's, and Caleb would be there, and everybody would kind of go and hang out there at our house, which we loved because it was always, there's always so many people there. I do remember also Leo coming from, at the time Leo was living in McAllen, and they would come and visit us, and Lucy would come, and she didn't speak English when she was little, and I remember we used to play in the porch, and we would play like we were princesses or whatever. She's like 10 months younger than I am, and I think I was jealous of her. She was such a cute little girl and sang and everything, but it was always gibberish, so I would make fun of her because she didn't know how to speak English. She just spoke Spanish. Poor thing. And then I do remember also going to McAllen a lot and visiting, and I remember that they had a raccoon as a pet, and it was a big raccoon. And I remember Leo and Cota and the kids in the house that they lived in McAllen, and I remember it like they had a chain. It was up like in a like a clothesline, so it would be loose, but yet there was this big old wire across, and he would be on this clothesline. I remember being really frightened of that, but it seems like Leo's kids loved animals. They had all kinds of animals all the time, everywhere. And we had the best time every time we went to McAllen. We would go to a little store nearby and buy candy for a penny, fresh tortillas, pan dulce. I mean, it was just heaven for us kids. Let's see, and then I remember when my dad moved to California, my brother Caleb had already gone to follow his girlfriend, Gordy. I think Gordy's mom didn't like my brother, so she tried to get them separated and took my sister-in-law to California, to San Jose, and my brother followed, got a job at the Bank of America, and they ended up getting married. So so my brother told my dad that there were a lot of construction, a lot of building going on in San Jose, California, and that he should go over there. So my dad went, and there was a lot of work there, so he started working. So he decided that he was going to move the family to San Jose, California from San Antonio. I remember that my sister Becky was in high school, so she stayed. She was going to be going into high school, so she stayed the following year. She was going to stay with. She stayed with Josie and Noah, and I remember we put a lot of stuff in the shed that she had out there. We had this car, and Pete, who was I believe 15 and a half at the time, was driving us to California in this car. And I think we were pulling a little trailer as well. So it was Pete and Bob and Orpha and my mom, and that was it. And we also followed another family that was going to California, so we were sort of following them. I remember driving, and we would pull up next to each other, and we would be throwing fruit back and forth from one car to the other. We just did a lot of crazy stuff. But my brother Pete drove us all the way to San Jose, California, and we stayed with Gordy and Caleb. They had probably a 2-bedroom, 3-bedroom home at the time, so we stayed with them until we found our own home. And I remember Gordy, it was really funny. She used to chase us with dirty diapers. Little Cal was a baby. They just had Caleb. And I think we used to just tease her or bother her, I don't remember, but she would chase us with dirty diapers, and we would be screaming all over the place. But it was so much fun. It was a lot of fun. And then when we finally moved to Cottontail, I remember that Gordy and Caleb lived around the corner in a duplex, and I used to go there and actually watch Caleb, probably in Louis. But I think I was, maybe, was it you, Almita? I had to have been maybe in the 6th grade. I was in the 6th grade by then. So I remember getting paid a little bit to go watch you. I don't know if because I don't think your mom works, so maybe it was just helping her out, or she would go to the store or something. I don't even remember. But they were just probably trying to help my mom out by having me do work, you know. So
Date night.
yeah, that's right, date night. And then the other thing I do remember is when we were moving to San Jose, my mom told us how we were going to be able to work, and we were going to be able to work and get money for picking fruit. So in my mind, I thought it was just going to be like there were going to be fruit trees in the front of our house, and we were going to pick this fruit, and these trucks were going to come by and give us money for this fruit that we picked. Well, that was not the case at all. We had never seen orchards of prunes and apricots. And I remember my mother, because my dad was doing carpentry work. My mom is extremely resourceful, and she wanted a home, so she was going to have us work, us younger kids. So by then it was the 4 of us. We were going to be working for a down payment for a house. And I was 9, so Bob was probably 10, Orpha 12, Pete maybe, I guess he was 15, so something like that. And we got fired at several places because we didn't know what we were doing. You know, she would tell the man that, you know, we could pick this orchard, and we didn't know what we were doing. You know, they had these big old boxes, and we didn't know that you're supposed to put the fruit in the bucket, and then the bucket goes into this big box. We would be dragging these big boxes, and we're all kids. So I remember getting fired several times before we realized what we were doing, you know. But we worked very hard, and we did raise enough money for a down payment of the house that we bought in Cottontail, and that was very good. I remember Leo, my mom being concerned about Leo in McAllen and convincing him to come and move to California. So the whole family came. He had 5 kids, I believe. Is it 5, 6? 6 kids. And they converted our garage into a studio. apartment where they did the cooking and everything. They didn't have a bathroom in there, and they lived there until they were able to save money for a down payment for their own house. And I remember my brother Leo was really, really strict, and poor Lucy, she couldn't play with us, and I would go places, but he wouldn't allow her to go with me. He thought I was too wild, which I wasn't, but in a way. Had some very good memories. My mother was very strict with us. I remember my brother Pete and Bob always getting in trouble. Bob especially, he would take off in cars, my dad's car, my brother's, Pete's car, whatever car was there, he would just take off on it and do joyriding or whatever. I remember I was driving when I was 13, 14 years old. We would all be driving the car. I do remember helping my dad drive from Texas when I was 14 too, because by then his eyesight was getting really bad, and I had gotten a special permit to help him. So I was driving young. I was a better driver than Orpha. I think Orpha had problems with her vision, so my dad preferred me driving instead of Orpha. And so we did a lot when we were young. I remember my parents being very strict, but my mom would go to Texas every year to visit my older brothers and sisters, and the younger ones, we would stay with my dad. And I remember all I had to do was bake him cookies and sweets and whatever, and then I would ask him if I can go to the school dance, and he would allow me, and there I would go to the school dance, as long as my mom wasn't there. So that was good. And then pretty much high school had some rough times because they were so strict, but they loved me, and that's why. I remember dating or trying to date my husband Greg, who is Japanese, and my mom was totally against it. She told me that Japanese men beat their wives, and so we had a very difficult courtship, but eventually they did accept him. I did sneak out. I'm not too proud of that, but I did sneak out. He had one of his best friends for the senior ball come and ask my dad if he can take me. He was Mexicano, good-looking Mexicano, and he asked my dad, and my dad said okay. And then his name is David Vasquez, as a matter of fact. He came, picked me up, and took me to Greg's house, and he went and got his date, and all four of us went to the senior ball. But the following year, my mom found the picture when we were away in college, and so I got in trouble for that. But long story short, they finally accepted Greg when we became engaged, and the day before our marriage, they gave their blessing. And I know Greg was one of my mom's favorite son-in-laws. And the reason I know that is that she fed him like crazy, and I think our first year of marriage, first 2 years, he must have gained 20 pounds from the tortillas and everything that she made for him. One thing I want to say is that I am so blessed because of the Christian upbringing from my mom and dad, both my mom and dad. I never heard them yelling at one another. I didn't hear the cursing. I never saw them smoking. I never saw them drinking. There wasn't yelling in our home. So I know that we had a very great family roots there. They instilled the value of family. We were all very close, even though my brothers and sisters were married. We always got together in holidays. We prayed for one another. We took after one another. If someone was sick or financially in need, my mom was there. Although my mother didn't work, my dad was a carpenter, and they raised 12 of us. When I remember when we bought our first home, they're the ones that loaned us the money, and we did repay them, but for them to have that money in the bank says a lot. And I know that she did the same for all my siblings that were in need. she was very resourceful, and she had the money, and she was always willing to loan the money or give the money that we needed. I hope that we continue this tradition with our kids and our grandkids, the value of family and the value of a Christian family that believes in the Lord Jesus Christ, and we worship the Lord Jesus Christ, and that we're not ashamed of our faith. So I just want to urge the rest of the family to continue that beautiful heritage that our parents instilled in us. That's all I have to say.